Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, throughout the past year, we've spoken about the different parenting styles that can result in a positive parenting experience. Meta-parenting is something that I haven't heard of until today, and that is because our guest has revealed that he has coined the term meta-parenting. So here joining me today is George Holden. Thank you so much for joining me today, George.
Hi, it's my pleasure to be here with you.
It's so good to talk about, and as your experience as a professor and a developmental psychologist, how has your experience been with sort of coming up with the term meta-parenting?
Well, interestingly, the very first study I did when I was a graduate student was looking at how mothers manage 2.5-year-old children in the supermarket. And what I wanted to do a naturalistic study to learn more about parents. So I was following parents around. And what I noticed there was that the most effective parents, that is, parents who were having a good experience in the supermarket because their kid wasn't tantruming or having a fit or demanding things, were being very anticipatory and proactive in doing things like providing objects for their child to play with, or talking to their child about the shopping experience, or even avoiding aisles that had problematic items on it, like toys or candy. And so that sort of was the first experience for me about parenting to get me interested in this sort of the cognitive aspects of parenting. And I followed up those observations with home interviews. And virtually all the mothers were very intentional about their behavior in the supermarket, particularly the good ones who were effective in avoiding conflicts with their children by engaging them in the shopping task, for instance, or asking them to hold something or pick out, which banana do they want or what have you. So that really gave me sort of the first insight into one key aspect of meta-parenting, which is anticipating and acting in such a way to avoid problems. And then so my career continued in the area of parenting, and I did a lot of different studies. And after about 15 or 20 years, sort of put together some of these different observations I had had about what effective parents are doing into this concept called meta-parenting. And it's a simple idea. It's just, what is the thinking that's going on, typically before or after interactions with the child, centered on child rearing. And I worked closely with one of my grad students on this, and what we came up with is there's sort of 4 major components, areas of this thinking. One is, as the one I mentioned, the anticipating. A second one is assessing, and that really is kind of observing, monitoring the child, assessing how he or she is developing, maybe comparing him or her with peers, seeing if they seem to be on track, identifying potential problems. But it's all this thinking when you're not interacting with your child, but thinking about how is my child functioning in the world? How's he doing? How is she doing in school? That kind of thing. So that's the second component, the assessing. The third one that follows from the assessing is problem solving. And this is something that all parents have to do a lot of. I have my daughter has a 4-year-old who's having sleep problems. She wakes up in the middle of the night and is crying out for her mom and dad and waking them up. And so that sleep problems are very common for most parents. But that's just one of 1,000 problems that parents typically kind of deal with. So how do parents deal with problem solve? How do they deal with issues that arise? Do they consciously, intentionally think through things, or do they just react automatically almost? So that's the idea of the problem solving in meta-parenting. And then finally, we have the fourth key component, we think, is reflecting. So after the interaction is over, thinking about the child, how the child's doing, how the parent acted. Was that the right action to take? Did they overreact? Did they underreact? So that is the other component, the fourth component, kind of involving this thinking aspect of parenting.
So when I talk about sort of the whole idea of meta-parenting, what sort of came up, what made you come up with the term meta and using meta as a parenting analysis style?
Well, when I studied developmental psychology and we studied cognitive development, one of the basic concepts in memory development is meta-memory. So one's awareness of their own memory. And so I sort of borrowed that idea and took it to parenting. And so what is one's awareness or thinking about one's own parenting? And then that led me, what I realized from talking with parents and then becoming a parent myself, what I realized is parents spend a lot of time in this area of meta-parenting. At least particularly good parents, I think, have to do this quite a lot in just dealing with normal developing children. And if you have an atypically developing child or a child with some challenges, you have to do that even more. So this is really, in my view, this is a very important aspect of parenting that really hasn't been adequately investigated. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to begin putting our finger on what's going on in this domain and drawing attention to it and hopefully encouraging other investigators to look at it and ask different questions.
And before we get to talking about it even more, we love to sort of start off with a little icebreaker just to get to know you as a person before we get to know you as an expert on the field today. So to start off with, just share the first thing that sort of comes to your head when I ask you these questions or keywords.
Yep.
What's your current favorite book at the moment?
The Wager, a book by David Grin about a kind of a shipwreck and the mutiny of the crew. It's quite exciting and fascinating.
Oh, wow.
A historical novel.
Oh, okay. So is it based on true or is it a fictional?
Yeah. No, based on diaries
wow.
that he identified, and it's quite fascinating.
Really yeah, then that's really cool. How about a favorite movie that you have at the moment?
Let's see. I don't have one at the I haven't actually been to the movies in a long time due to COVID. A bit sort of avoiding movies, but one of my all-time favorites, of course, would be like Schindler's List. If that'll be acceptable.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I can tell a lot about a person from the interest in movies, I think, and Schindler's
Uh-huh.
List is definitely one of the biggest tell of a movie I think you could possibly ever have.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, how about podcasts? Do you have most recent podcast that you've listened to?
Um, I like listening to sort of intellectual podcasts, like the New York Times, The Daily. Um,
Okay.
the fun one, NPR, is Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Do you know that
Okay.
one? I don't know if it's broadcast
I
in Australia, but it's National Public Radio, and it's a sort of a news one, but with humor. They have comedians cracking jokes.
I don't think it's showed. No, it's not actually showed here. That's interesting.
Ah, okay.
Okay. No, that sounds really cool. I love people taking the have a comedic sense to news
Mm,
and sort of their aspect and look
yeah,
into it as well.
yeah, it's fun to listen to.
Now, do you have a famous role model that you have at the moment?
One of my a hero, I guess you're asking who's my hero,
Yeah.
uh, and it was someone I knew when I was in college. He was a minister, is Reverend William Sloane Coffin, and he was both a powerful preacher, but he was also very active in the anti-nuclear war movement. So
Mhm.
to me, he was a real hero, both for being a charismatic individual, but also doing a lot of good in the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's great when you sort of take a person who has done a lot and sort of see them as a huge role model and hero. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's always really interesting when to sort of hear the answers of the different people that are the role models and the heroes of everyone on the show. Now, how about a most recent course that you've completed? And it doesn't have to be a big course, it can be a little tiny course as well.
I have not completed any course in ages. I hate to say. Um, let's see, I guess we had to do some various training at my university. Um, so maybe like 5 years ago, I did some kind of training, but
Mhm.
nothing. Uh, it wouldn't be very interesting. It'd be more like diversity training, um, but there's more interesting things in courses. For instance, hobbies. For instance,
Okay, do you
I
have a favorite hobby at the moment then?
oh yes, well I love gardening
Okay.
and vegetable gardening in particular. Um, and I also have a passion for antique tractors. So I own a
Okay.
1953 Farmall Cub.
Oh, wow. No, that's really cool. I think it's always really cool to sort of see the different hobbies and different interests that people have.
Uh-huh.
Um, the vegetable garden I can relate to. That was a big thing in my family throughout COVID, and then
Yeah,
suddenly
great.
COVID ended, and it was everyone went out of the house and completely forgot about the garden for a
Oh.
while. So it kind of grew naturally in the yard for a bit until we realized it was taking over our lives. But it was really cool to sort of see the progress in a vegetable growing
Yeah,
process and see
it's
and be excited.
yeah. As a developmental psychologist, I also love the development of plants and vegetables. I also like coffee roasting, so I roast my own coffee
Ooh.
beans,
Okay,
which is
wow.
fun. Yeah.
No, that's a big hit. You should come to Melbourne and sort of try to sell that here. Coffee is a big hit in Melbourne.
Yeah, good.
Now, talking about parenting and sort of talking about meta parenting, before we get into that, everyone has their own very various definitions as to what parenting is to them and sort of what their own parenting style is and how it's impacted them as a parent as well. So, what do you think your definition of parenting is?
Well, so parenting is, well, for one thing, it's the most important thing that most of us will ever do in the world. And it's very important, the parenting we receive for our development. So basically, it's parenting is the entire constellation of interactions and experiences that your parents engage in with you as a child and growing up over time. And it is a lifelong, it's not just a short-lived for the 18 years or whatever, but really it's a lifelong relationship that continues. And even though the form and the sort of the content changes a lot as the parents, as the child gets older, and the parents should adapt to that changing individual, it still is a very lifelong and our most important relationship that we'll ever have.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say is something that all parents should know before getting into that transition of parenting themselves?
Well, ideally they should be really committed and really wanting to be a parent, because it's such a major responsibility, and it's you could view it as a burden. I certainly viewed it as a great joy to be a parent. We have three wonderful, they're now adult children, but it's something that people should enter into intentionally and not accidentally. And they should also be committed such that they put a lot of energy into it to be the best parent they can be. And that involves meta-parenting to be a good parent.
Yeah. And sort of you easily slide into the next question, which is, can you explain a bit more as to how meta-parenting differs from other traditional parenting approaches?
Oh, okay. Well, it's not a parenting approach. It's really what it does is shine the light on this key aspect of parenting that typically researchers and those who write about parenting had not been attending to. So, for instance, we all know about Diana Baumrein's parenting styles, the permissive, authoritarian, authoritative. For instance, and as well as now to that, it was added the sort of neglectful parent would be a fourth style. But that doesn't, what goes into those different parenting styles can be a lot of meta-parenting. And what Diana Baumrein never did was focus on or talk about or think about what was involved in the thinking side of the parenting. She looked at really the warmth and the controlling aspects, but she didn't look at what was going on in the parent's mind. And so what we wanted to do is really draw attention to the important activity going on in parents from even before the child is born, but that must continue on to be good parents. They have to do a lot of thinking about their children, and they have to do a lot of kind of deliberate, intentional thought in order to successfully navigate the challenges of child rearing. So it's not a different approach. It cuts through all different approaches that have been talked about. It's just a different facet of parenting that hasn't been adequately been recognized.
And I think you said earlier when you were talking with other parents when sort of coming up with meta-parenting, and you were discussing that a lot of other parents do use meta-parenting without even knowing that they are. So how do we know that we are using the method, that sort of approach to meta-parenting?
Well, anytime you're doing things like anticipating or thinking about what the child might be doing in the near future, or anytime you're discussing with another parent how your own child is behaving and is it normal, or anytime you're talking to a counselor about a problem with your child and how to solve it, or anytime you're talking with, let's say, your partner and thinking about, did I respond the right way to my child's action? Those are all, key examples of meta-parenting. So parents are doing it all the time. And you don't have to put the label on meta-parenting that you're doing it, but it's important that you do it. And I think by labeling it as meta-parenting, it adds more weight to that activity, because then the parent recognizes that what they're doing is not just kind of idle thought, but it's really constructive, hopefully constructive thinking about their child and how best to parent. Now, there is sometimes it's not always constructive, and what we have found is that I mentioned reflecting is one aspect of meta-parenting, but ideally the reflecting involves thinking about what you did and did you do it the right way? Could there be a better way? But some parents in the sort of reflecting domain get stuck and they ruminate, it's called. And this is what depressed people can do. They ruminate a lot. They're sort of in this cycle and they just think about, oh, I screwed up. Oh, I screwed up. Oh, I'm rotten. I'm terrible. I did terrible action. And they aren't able to productively move beyond that negative thought. And they're just sort of stuck in that rumination about how they failed and how they screwed up or what have you. So it's not always good, that meta-parenting, but in general, my view is the more that parents meta-parent, the better they'll be as parents, because, they're seeking out new information. They're talking with others how to problem solve, or how to, is my child, developing appropriately, etc. So all that stuff is important for parents to be able to figure out, should I change my behavior? Should I take my child to a therapist? That kind of thing. So that's all a very important part of parenting.
And what are some examples of questions that you would sort of recommend to ask yourself as a parent if you're sort of stuck in that sort of self-sabotaging, overthinking, sort of I'm doing it all wrong kind of mindset?
So, well, you got to get out of that mindset by, I think the simplest would be to reach out to someone else and say, hey, I'm stuck in trying to figure out how to deal with this problem. And I think I messed up with my child. What do you think I should do? Can you give me some advice? So reaching out to others is, I think that the fastest and simplest and best way to get out of that a rut, if you will, if you get stuck in a mental rut or a rumination. But you can, also sort of prompt yourself to be creative and think about, okay, I yelled at my kid when, he was fresh to me. How else could I have reacted? And so instead of, you can sort of challenge yourself to think creatively instead of just being negative and getting down on yourself for your kind of automatic reaction. But then also that can lead to, why did I react that way? So it can lead to positive reflection. Was it, because it triggered some thoughts I had feelings when I was a kid, and my dad did that to me, or something like that. And I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like my dad in that area. So I really need to change. So it can lead to productive thinking if you sort of force yourself to get out of that rut.
And when talking about the children's impact Are there any specific age groups or developmental stages where meta-parenting is particularly relevant or effective?
And no, I'd say it's needed at all phases, all stages, all ages, and it can be, I'd say it gets parenting gets more complicated often as the kid gets older. So there's more issues, more potential negative influences than if they're just newborn babies and they're crying and they need to be it's simpler. Let's say it's simpler problem solving when they're newborns, obviously. And then as they get older, things do get more complicated. There's many more sources of influence, and the child is capable of many more types of behaviors and wants to exert their autonomy. So it does get more challenging as kids get older, and therefore more needing meta-parenting. But I'd say at all ages, all stages, meta-parenting is very important.
Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about the relationship a little bit earlier with your child and sort of how it sort of impacts, the whole idea of meta-parenting impacts your relationship with your child. How honest should you be about your own behavior when you've reacted in a way that you don't really want to react to your child?
I think the more honest you can be with your child, the better you will have a better relationship. So there's nothing wrong with a parent apologizing to their child when the parent messed up or if the parent overreacted. I mean, the child will respect the parent more if the parent is open and honest and wanting to promote a good relationship. Than if the parent feels they can't reveal to the child, what they were really thinking or whatever. So I think the more open communication, the better for the relationship.
Okay. And when talking about some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings, I've sort of come across the definition a little bit differently earlier on the show when sort of looking into it. How does meta-parenting and the whole idea, how does it differ from other examples such as mindful parenting or other reflective parenting practices?
So yeah, that's a good question. So it basically meta-parenting covers more aspects, I think, than something like there's several different terms, but like reflective parenting or mindful parenting. So the idea of mindfulness, for instance, is, I think, as I understand it, is that you are present, focused, non-judgmental in your interactions, and you don't react automatically, such as you might have if you were not mindful about your interactions. But it doesn't really cover the domains of some of these other domains that I've talked about that meta-parenting addresses, like anticipation or assessment or problem solving or reflecting. So it's more of a mindfulness is more of how one is interacting with the child in the moment. And then so reflective parenting is, well, very similar to the reflective mode of meta-parenting, because the idea there is that you are sort of consciously aware of your child's behavior and your behavior, and you're not reacting automatically, but you're reacting much more intentionally and thoughtfully. So reflective parenting is more in line with one aspect of meta-parenting, but again, it doesn't cover the other three key aspects of meta-parenting. So to answer your question, in some way, I think meta-parenting is more inclusive and encompassing, but it also is in the same domain about looking at how parents are thinking in their thought process. So it's along those lines, it's similar, but it's more inclusive than the others.
I think especially the way that you're explaining what mindful parenting is, and from what I understand it as well, there's a lot of, as good as it is, and I think I've heard a lot of my friends talk about mindful parenting quite often, and it sort of makes them feel like an inadequate parent as well, because there's a lot of things you can't react at the heat of the moment. If you do, you're not being mindful enough. And I think we talk about this a lot on the show when we talk about the idea that parents are still human, parents are still going to react, not perfectly, not being the perfect parent. And I think when you're talking about meta-parenting, it sort of has that humanistic approach to it, which is another thing that I've noticed that's very different from the other ways, because you're still able to react how you react, but you're able to learn from it yourself and also teach your child something about it as well. So it's a really human approach to things that I've sort of, at least the way that I'm sort of understanding what meta-parenting is.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. It certainly does, recognize and accept individuals as they are, but it also it has a promise of helping you improve your parenting. So it's what I would call a dynamic kind of process where it's open to change if you're willing to put the effort into it and think, do a little thinking about it. So like, for instance, some parents, a big problem around the world is when parents strike, hit, swap, spank, smack their children because the child was, let's say, disobedient. And I did a study where I talked with parents about that, and I found that a lot of the parents, some of the parents were not meta-parenting about it. They just say, yes, I spank and I slap my kid when they don't listen to me, and period. But a lot of the parents that I talked with, that action elicited meta-parenting, and it made them reflect about their parenting. And a lot of them regretted. They'd say, I felt so badly when I slapped my child, but I just lost it because I was so angry. So some actions, like the problematic action of corporal punishment, that can elicit meta-parenting, because then if they are reflecting or assessing, some parents reported to me when I asked them, how did your child react after you spanked the child? And they would say things like, oh, my child was really upset and wouldn't talk to me for 2 days, or that kind of thing. So by assessing the child, they recognize that action, spanking, wasn't an effective response to the child's behavior.
And I think it's so interesting when we're talking about the whole idea of like spanking a child just to make them realize that what they're doing is wrong. But in reality, it really doesn't. It sort of just teaches them that this is how a parent's going to react to a situation. It's not, okay, maybe I shouldn't do this.
Right. It is not, this could be the topic of a whole different show, corporal punishment. And in fact, there's now thousands of studies about it. And they're all amazingly uniform in finding it results in negative outcomes in many children. But yeah, the kids do not, it's not a good learning tool. Though from the parent's perspective, they think, oh, I see my child is crying because I spanked him. So he must have learned that it's not a good thing to do, whatever he did. But that's not how the child is processing that experience. So the parent there would kind of fail on the reflective parenting because they're not taking into account the child's perspective. And what the child's perspective is, ow, that really hurt. How could my parent who says they love me want to hurt me? And that makes me angry, or that makes me really sad. And so the kids focus much more on their emotions, and they don't focus on the lesson that the parent was trying to teach them.
So we're talking about the meta-parenting idea and just sort of how you would reflect. Would parents normally reflect in their own mind, or is it better just to use like a pen and paper and just write a few notes down and write a few lessons learned?
It depends on the individual. So some people probably would maybe benefit more by taking the time to write out some of this things. Other people might talk to a partner about it, or others could just think about it themselves and recognize, engage in the meta-parenting themselves. But I'd say for most people, it's easier if they are communicating with someone else about it, because then that person can react to what they say, and the person can, raise questions or say, did you think about this possible explanation, or did you try this solution, that kind of thing. So it's often easier if you have someone, whether it be a partner or a family member or a therapist or whatever, to talk with about it.
And what other strategies would you recommend that a parent adopt in order to practice meta-parenting effectively?
Well, so the key thing is taking the time to do it. So, if you could structure some time, like after the child's gone to bed, you spend 5 minutes thinking about the day and thinking about, how did my child do today? Were there any problem behaviors? How did I react? Did I react appropriately? So reflecting on the course of the day, I think would be certainly a good practice for all parents to engage in. Also, before there's a transition or before going out, thinking about how the child might react. So engaging in anticipation early in the process, before you have to, let's say, leave the park. Think about how's my kid going to like leaving when I say it's time to go. Most kids are not going to like it. So you have to then sort of set the stage by giving warnings and maybe coming up with ideas about what could be a good thing to do when they leave, like go get ice cream or something, or ways of enticing the child to make the transition. But again, sort of engaging before a transition in some anticipatory thinking, or one aspect of meta-parenting is a really good idea. So those would be, to me, the two things to do. Try to work on your anticipations, how the child will react, and then spend time at the end of the day reflecting over the day and thinking about the day and assessing the child, thinking about your problem solving, maybe discussing those with someone else.
I think it's such a great way to sort of think about the anticipation of it, because usually we think about, okay, this is the action that we're going to do. And then if it doesn't work, we're like, okay, so what other strategy can we do? For example, the kid is screaming, not wanting to leave the park. And that's when we think about what we're going to do. So the anticipation is a very interesting aspect that is actually very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical if you want to minimize conflicts. It's really what the parents need to do. They need to be able to anticipate how the child's going to react. They need to engage in various actions to minimize that, and also then have some strategies in their back pocket if the child gets upset, to try to change the child's demeanor. So, it could be use of humor. Sometimes I'm blessed with now 5 grandchildren, and we get to babysit pretty frequently. And when our 4-year-old granddaughter's mom leaves, sometimes the 4-year-old gets upset about it. So I have to if I can divert her attention to something that she likes, or sometimes I'll just act really silly, and she'll start, instead of being being upset and sort of almost tantruming by acting silly, it gets her out of her mood, and then we move into a constructive or fun activity. So thinking about those in advance, so you're ready to pull them out and try them, see what works, is a good strategy too of meta parenting.
Oh, that's perfect. Now, going into our practice and habit part, this is something that you do personally, or a practice that you do in order to sort of be a little bit more self-aware, I think is a big part of the show. So what is a practice that you do to reflect on how your own actions impact others around you?
Well, I probably don't do that enough. I don't do that enough of that meta work. But I think talking with my wife is a practice that I'd engage in, that where we could bounce off reactions or that kind of thing. She can sometimes informs me that I came across in one way that may not be what I had wanted to, and kind of thing. So she's a good source of reflective thinking to look at those kinds of things.
And what are 3 good things that you've sort of found that this practice really helps?
Well, I don't know if there's 3. I think it helps develop relationships better. It certainly helps, I think, it helps my relationship with my wife, because she sees that I'm open to feedback and changing my behavior. And I think it helps my my feeling of self-confidence by being able to change and being better able to interact with people.
And in contrast to that, do you have at least one challenge that sort of comes about when you're going through this practice?
One challenge. I don't know. What? Like what? Do you have an example of what?
I think just sort of one challenge that could possibly happen, I guess, would be the aspect of not being that able to react in a certain way, or not sort of learning from that conversation or things like that. At least that's another example that I have found in other guests as well.
So yeah, no, nothing really comes to mind in that.
Okay. Well, that's so good. Now, how do you think that this practice has impacted your parenting as well as your perception in how life goes?
What, meta-parenting?
It could be meta-parenting. Yes, we could do how meta-parenting does.
Well, I think by sort of labeling it and understanding the different aspects of it, it has helped me become a better parent and grandparent, because it then I sort of recognize kind of the phases I need to do and think about along the lines of meta-parenting that I might not have been conscious of without that construct.
Well, that is That is perfect to sort of hear. And now it slides in perfectly with our next section, which is the last section of the show, and it's our open mic. Give you a chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about or something that you want to bring awareness to as well. So in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and just sort of talk with the audience and discuss something that you would love to promote.
Okay. Well, what I've been passionate about for the last, I'd say 20 years is trying to get parents not to spank or slap or smack or hit their children. And I'm now the president of the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children. And it's something I founded about 15 years ago, an organization. And we're trying to get states to ban corporal punishment in the schools and also to get parents to stop hitting their children. Because there's now been literally more than 1,000 studies done on the topic that find that children are likely to have problems if parents are spanking and slapping. There's just no good that comes out of it. And there's much better parenting approaches under the sort of label of positive parenting. The topic of another show, perhaps, than hitting children. It just teaches them to be aggressive. It results in some children becoming depressed or anxious. In extreme cases, they can be suicidal. So it's just very damaging practice that has been around for a long time and is gradually fading. But it's something I'm very passionate about trying to get parents to stop doing.
Mm-hmm. And I think, especially being a part of the Alliance, it's definitely something that I think needs to be spoken about a whole lot more. And like you said, it needs to be a whole other topic on a show, just discussing the negative impact. And I think we've spoken about that a little bit earlier when it comes to the negative impact that it has on children and their relationship with their parents as well, I think later on. But yeah, it has to be a whole other show, a whole other topic.
There is a group in Australia working to end corporal punishment. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will definitely. Yes. Yeah. No, I would love to see that. And that will be perfect to see. Thank you so much, George, for talking to me on the show today and for joining me and spreading awareness, not only on meta-parenting, but the alliance that has on no hitting policy on children. I think it's such an important thing to sort of focus on. If there's a way that audience members would like to get in contact with you to be able to discuss something that I definitely have missed, or even further about what meta-parenting is there a contact info that you have?
Sure. Yeah. The easiest is email me at gholden@smu.edu for Southern Methodist University.edu. So gholden@smu.edu. And I'd be happy to respond or engage in discussion with you.
Perfect. Well, I will have that down in the link as a link down below for easy access for everyone to find George and to find him a little bit more. So thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I think it's been such a eye-opener of a show and discussing a lot more as to what meta-parenting is.
Great. Enjoyed it. And the other thing is you could look up www.endhitting.org to learn about the Alliance. So for those interested.
Yes, well, I will definitely have those down below as well. I think it's such an important thing that we need to promote. And it's an important way in sort of moving into a new world of consent and talking about all these different things. It's such an important thing to be able to see the children's viewpoint as to how the policy should be changed. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.